Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today on our webinar talking about blockchain and pharmaceutical supply chain transformation. I'm really excited to be your moderator today. My name is Clea Carrington, and before I introduce our incredible group of panelists, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our Canadian Blockchain Consortium. Right now, we are one of the largest industry not-for-profit blockchain organizations across Canada. We started off in Alberta supporting our emerging and thriving technology sector, and we are a real force in terms of education, advocacy, events, and supporting business development and marketing in the blockchain ecosystem space all across Canada. If you're interested in learning more about us, please come visit us at canadablockchain.ca. Of course, as a not-for-profit, we couldn't go very far without our absolutely incredible members to our organization. As you can see on the screen, we have so many amazing companies that are there and been supporting us since day one. We love to engage with you guys, so please, engage in the Q&A. If you have any questions, just type them into the Q&A chat box. I know our panelists would love to answer them for you. If you like our content, we do release content every single day. So follow us on social media. We're on Twitter and LinkedIn, as well as Facebook. And recently this year, really excited, we launched a magazine. So we've done our 4th issue, just came out, our April edition, all around big blockchain moves and NFTs. So if you're interested, you can also, again, visit our website, canadablockchain.ca, and you'll be able to click and download. It's a free magazine, never have to charge for it, but it has some really amazing content that we deliver out in the first of every single month. So to start with today's event, so the need to ensure safe and reliable supplies of COVID-19 vaccinations has definitely driven the need for digital solutions to diverse medical supply chain challenges, as well as digital health. So all across the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry, this pandemic has been a bit of a catalyst for very long overdue digital transformation that will be able to use blockchain technology to support greater traceability, transparency among very diverse stakeholders, and definitely improve the standard of patient care. So we're excited today to help you discover why the world's largest healthcare and pharmaceutical companies are rapidly adopting blockchain for their complex supply chains, and how this emerging technology can create definitely a safer and more optimized future for our healthcare system. So I'm definitely excited to introduce our amazing panelists today. Reg, want to wave and say hi. So Reg Joseph was appointed as the CEO of Health City in February of 2018. He has 20 years experience spanning the health, technology, and investment sectors. At Health City, Reg is focused on enabling platforms such as artificial intelligence and machine learning and augmented and virtual reality to drive economic growth and health impact. Reg has served in a wide variety of roles, including as an analyst at the Boston-based Leerink Swan & Co. I'm so sorry if I did not say that right. Slightly dyslexic, so my reading is like, a little off sometimes. And has led the business unit at US-based Introgen Corporation, now Thermo Fisher. Most recently, he served as the Vice President of Health at Alberta Innovates, managing outgoing investments from the Heritage Fund. And Reg currently serves as the chair of the board for BioTalent Canada and sits on BioAlberta's policy committee and serves as past chair for the board for SAGE. He has a bachelor's in science and psychology and an MBA in finance. You have an incredible background, Reg. That's amazing. And next we have Mammon. I've known Man for a while at the Edmonton Airport. So he has over 15 years of leadership in aviation across various ground handling, airline, and airport functions. Mammon joined the Edmonton International Airport in 2018 as the Director of E-commerce, Cargo, Aviation, Real Estate. You have so many jobs, sir. And I keep it all together. Together with a dedicated team, Mammon works with strong customer focus to retain Canada and Edmonton positions in the global supply chain. His duties include identifying new technologies and partnerships that support the aviation sector, and recognizes the crucial role that air cargo provides in connecting the world. He is committed to advancing the industry through collaboration and innovation, and Mammon holds a master's degree in business administration from Holt International Business School in Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you so much for joining us today. Last but definitely not least, we have Tom. Tom leads transformational change with a high-performance team focused on complex challenges. With over a 24-year career, he has founded, built, and exited multiple technology companies in advanced technology industries. He has advised the several provincial governments of Canada and France on innovation policy and has been involved in structuring the 3 Crown agencies involved in research, innovation, and technology development. Tom has assembled and structured 900 million of investment funds for stimulating and growing innovative capacity for public and private clients. Tom is a frequent advisor to the government on policies to grow ICT, biotechnology, geometrics, and clean tech sectors. Tom has also actively advised some of the leading innovation companies in Canada, pharmaceutical, energy, telecommunications, and technology sectors. And currently he sits as the Chief Innovation Officer for TrustFix. So thank you guys so much for joining me here on this webinar today. All right, so I'm just going to jump right into it with my first question. All right, so the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely highlighted the need for change in a way that digital healthcare as well as pharmaceutical supply chains are managed. So what are some of the biggest issues that you saw that kind of arose during this crisis in the healthcare space? Anyone can start.
I'll jump in to get started. The first thing that we definitely noticed is antiquated systems around supply chain and a lot of wasted time in terms of being able to verify supplies, whether it's PPE or anything else. And so you have this discontinuity in the supply chain. And so you've got a lot of supplies sitting in various jurisdictions, not accessible by the people who need it. And so that was one of the biggest problems, particularly that we saw with PPE and we'll likely see on the vaccine side.
Maybe I should jump right in, just picking up on that, Kalea, just as Reg said, touched on PPE. As an airport, I can definitely identify that there's been substantial impact after the COVID crisis that we're in the process now. So COVID was clearly not just a health crisis. It was a supply chain crisis as well, as we're seeing and continue to live. One of the things that was highlighted, global supply chains are these tangled, very complex, highly integrated systems that have all of these manual processes and paper-based processes today. Lots of handoffs, lots of border crossings, communication required across various jurisdictions. And as you can imagine, as an airport, we're a place of confluence where a lot of these handoffs occur. We're fortunate that we're quite heavily involved in the pharma sector, but just like Reg mentioned, there was a lack of visibility in terms of where some of the products and the commodities were at any point in time. So one of the things that was clear during the entire COVID crisis was some of the weaknesses, the cracks in the system, perhaps is a good way to put it, in specifically the healthcare supply chain. We saw it with the PPE, and now as we think about vaccines and other pharmaceuticals, some of those sort of long-standing processes, both from a procurement side or from movement side, really have highlighted some of the weaknesses.
I think just a couple of other things to add to my colleagues' comments would be some of the human and information weaknesses this has also exposed for us. So the notion of how we've been able to access information about the safety of things like vaccines or their progress through various stages of clinical trials and their evolution towards commercially available solutions, I think have also exposed to us how we can fall various types of misinformation. Are there going to be certain types of side effects? Are certain countries really discontinuing use or limiting it for particular types of patients? So those kinds of access to information elements, which are normally managed in the clinical trials process in a very unique way, were under pressure and continue to be under pressure at these times as well.
Absolutely. So the market size has reached about like $90 billion in 2020 for digital health technologies, and they're being rather quickly adopted as a way to kind of create that better standard for patient care as well as reducing operational costs. So what are some of the ways that patients could benefit from blockchain's use in our healthcare space? I can think of a few, but.
Well, I could jump in on a couple of things, maybe just to pass it around our little window pane here in the opposite direction this time around. I think one of the easiest ways that I can think about that, transitioning out of our last conversation about COVID, is the notion of a COVID passport. If we're looking at ways of ensuring that we are who we say we are, one of the classic use cases of blockchain is around identity management, credentials management, and whether that's credentials as a health professional or whether we've in fact got our own vaccine treatment for travel purposes. Those present, I think, a very early win for us to be able to look at blockchain as a critical enabler for healthcare here at this early time.
Yeah, maybe I'll pick up on that really quickly, Clay. Just a quick comment as well on the vaccine passports and inevitably of some of these portable proof of immunizations that are coming down the line. One of the other things that we've seen coming out of this is health, wellness, self-care has been elevated in terms of its importance, and definitely moving forward, this will occupy a much larger share of the discussion in markets. And accordingly, all the industries that support that, obviously looking at it from a supply chain perspective in particular, but across the sector, all the aspects of a person's lifestyle will ultimately need to respond to the higher expectations that are being placed on these particular things, including the adoption of, like Tom mentioned, things like health passports.
And if I could just jump in on one point, which is, this whole COVID opportunity is going to open up a larger opportunity around self-care and self-management, right? So, Tom, you raised about the whole identity management, credentials management. One of the things that we know intuitively in Canada and even in the US is that patients own their own information. But the problem we have around that is the trust and credentials around that. And so if we have a system like a ledger system provided by blockchain, now you have the ability for a patient to actually take control of their own data, share that data with whomever they feel it makes sense. So it could be their own clinician that they're dealing with, but it could be a physiotherapist, an occupational therapist, or a family member. But now you've got that credentialing, you know that the information that's in there is legit, and you can verify and validate that. And that's the thing that's really holding us back right now. And so we still have this break between the patients and their access to information and their ability to share that information with who they want. Blockchain definitely opens up the door to do that.
Yeah, and I think, Reg, just to build on your comment there, I was a part of some of the early work in the mid-90s around health privacy law in this province. And one of the things that I was quite struck by through the course of that is all of the important considerations about release of that information. And a decade ago, one of my early experiences in the healthcare system in Hong Kong took me for a bit of a loop as really understanding that technology can be a fundamental enabler and protector of privacy, more so than any of the traditional human systems that we've had. So I could get the text message to authorize the physician in front of me to access my medical record in ways that today I still am challenged to do in my own country.
Absolutely. So like some of the things that I've been learning about and seeing in the kind of like blockchain healthcare space, there's a few companies. So there's one, I think it's called Heath. And what they're doing is on blockchain, being able to verify the credentials of the healthcare provider. So there, I guess in the States, especially, there's been, someone's claiming they have a particular certification, they don't actually have it. And to make sure that, if you're hiring that doctor or that nurse or that specialist, that they actually have all the things that they say they do, being able to verify those credentials. And that also helps the patient feel more assured that, the person that's working on them actually has the knowledge base to do so. And there's another one, I believe it's Burst IQ, and they're doing kind of like that. It's being able to have that ownership back of your own data. So I know in Alberta here, we have kind of like a My Digital ID, and we're able to see our healthcare data, but we still don't own our own healthcare data, right? Like we go to a medical professional, our doctor, they give us blood work or stuff like that. They are the ones we usually have to go to be able to see what those results look like. With this, we're able to see it more online. But with these applications that are coming out on blockchain, it kind of gives the patient the ability to own their own data and have privacy with their own data, and then only release it to the doctor if they feel comfortable to do so. It's like, okay, I choose you as my doctor. I'm going to give you the access to be able to see this. And ideally you'd have like your entire healthcare or, you know, your health history in this, because right now it's so fragmented. Like if I went to a doctor, if I went to a naturopath, a chiropractor, any other specialty, I have to go and physically write down all these different things I'm feeling. They then own that data and they're working on me and they take their own notes, and I'd have to request access to see it. Where instead it's like if I owned all that and then everything was compiled in one space, a doctor would be able to get a better holistic view of like my entire health history, but I would be able to own my own data. So those are kind of some of the kind of things I'm seeing that are happening in the space in terms of like how blockchain's being used for it. And it, there's still all kinds of things to consider, like privacy, et cetera, but it's definitely moving in the right direction, I think.
Yeah, Clay, I'll just add to that personal experience. I think you and I talked about this before, but, you know, on the My Health Alberta app, for example, you know, I was actually visiting a physician and I had the diagnostic results on my phone, which came directly from the system, but my clinician couldn't get access on her system. And so, you know, I showed her the data, but she can't take that data, right? She's looking at it on my phone. I can show her that I got it on my app, but she can't access the data. There's no way to verify or credential that data that I'm showing her. So unfortunately, it was kind of a wasted appointment because she wasn't able to act on the data that we already had and I had on my phone, but she couldn't access it through a trusted partner. And so couldn't move on it, right? And so we've got the steps in play in terms of some of the accessibility, Kalia, but you're so right, that sharing mechanism, that sharing platform is what we need now to be able to do that effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. So my next question, so this is a really astonishing statistic that I read and I had no clue, but global counterfeit drug sales actually equal about $30 billion a year. And as many as 1 in 10 medications sold in developing countries are actually fraudulent and absolutely unsafe if they're fraudulent. So any concepts on how blockchain could help stop this rather deadly black market that's happening?
I'll jump in first. You know, look, the bottom line here is that it's going to force a leveling up of the sector overall, right? And so right now, there are a number of pharmaceutical companies that have full track and trace capabilities. You've got serial numbers right at the point of manufacture and so forth, but not all. And so this is where you get the counterfeit challenges coming in. And so there are some players that play in that space, and then there's some that are not. And if you're running into supply chain issues, then you're going to start to look at multiple providers for a particular drug or a vaccine. If you have now a global recognized system, like MetaLedger, for example, then it's going to force all vendors into that system to have a full serial number track and trace capability and built in for them to participate in the supply chain at all. And so it's just really going to bring up the level of credibility of all players all the way along that supply chain. And so it's like the financial system in a way. It gives credibility all the way along. And that's something that we don't have right now in the pharmaceutical industry. And it's even worse, as you know, when we're talking about PPE and consumables, there are probably every jurisdiction around the world can come back and say, we have some PPE that we bought that didn't meet standards, right? So.
Yeah, that provenance tracking capability, I definitely think is being really, really critical, because being able to get that authentication, it's like this piece of PPE, this vaccination, this ingredient for this medication that you're using actually came from a verified registered source. I believe I was just talking to someone today that was saying it was like a 10-year goal in terms of supply chain for Canada, where it's like you had to have complete traceability of your entire supply chain by 2023. So we're 2 years away. And it's becoming more and more critical now that we've seen through this pandemic to be able to track where your food is coming from, your pharmaceuticals are coming from, just anything to give people the assurance that they're actually getting what they're intending. Like I personally would not want to take a counterfeit vaccination for COVID. Like that would be rather scary.
Absolutely, Kalea. And one of the things that I'm quite comforted in as I take my family into McDonald's is, Trust Bix, the company I work for today, we can track and trace the animals that compose the patty and the burger that we're eating as a family. And I can know the provenance on the story behind that animal, that it's verified, sustainable. And yet I can't do the same thing with that same level of transparency with the medications I can purchase over the counter. And so those issues that you're raising, I think are profound for us. And not just from the vantage point of knowing that what we have as consumers is safe, but if I think about this from the companies who are manufacturing those things, clearly COVID is stressing their supply chain capacity to manage this today. But if I think about my liability as a manufacturer, I have responsibilities once a drug is in the market to also be able to report adverse events and to track that information. I need to be able to collect evidence through the course of multiple stages of regulatory approvals in my clinical trials. All of those are phenomenal use cases of blockchain that present a way to aggregate that data and intelligence and provide them as manufacturers assurances that they're meeting an elevated standard of care in the eyes of consumers. Of course, for us to be able to know that we're moving beyond the product packaging that might be tamper-proof for our children, but also for us to know that the ingredients are sourced in ways that are complying with our health needs.
Absolutely. I was reading an interesting statistic. They said, according to Global Market Insights, they think that Canada will have about 69% adoption of blockchain technology across our healthcare system by, I think it was 2025. So interesting.
Yeah, that's a really interesting stat, and I'm not surprised about the high number, the 69%, and Tom, the elevated use cases. I don't mean to scare you here with another stat, but you talked about that scary number, the 30 billion, from a counterfeit perspective. In addition to ensuring the security and the traceability that, of course, opens the door for all sorts of quality control mechanisms, there's some other obvious, that I'll call obvious use cases from an inventory management perspective, contracts and payments, just authenticity. But additionally, there's another scary aspect of it, and that's actually maintaining the cold chain. One of the things that we as an airport recognized many years ago was that this was in fact a glaring problem. So we're fortunate that we're the only airport in Canada that has the IATA CIV certification, which is the highest global standard for the handling of pharmaceuticals. And in large part, it's because over $35 billion a year, and that's a pre-COVID number, is this impact of pharma that's spoiled due to temperature fluctuations. So when you start to add in all these other deviations that occur, it starts to become a really scary number, and it definitely it further elevates the use case and the positive implications of introducing blockchain technologies. And of course, so in addition to sort of the physical security, I think that temperature security is another piece that needs to be acknowledged, especially in cold chain. It's so key. The quality control ensures that the integrity of the product has been maintained, because at a minimum, the product is worthless, or even worse, it's actually harmful for patients because it's experienced some sort of deviation, either from temperature or humidity, light, vibration, shocks. There's a lot of attributes that need to be maintained, through the transport of this product across the many handoffs. And that's another place where this immutable system can ensure that the product that ultimately is administered to the patient is as intended by the manufacturer. So that there's clearly a lot of opportunity to elevate the integrity of the products that we're moving.
Absolutely. Like I know in the supply chain space, specifically for blockchain, like you might not know exactly what happened to your product, but you'll at least be able to know when and where, right? Like if you're doing tracking and you don't know exactly why that temperature differential happened, but you can at least pinpoint and ideally address it sooner than you would. But it's definitely growing, and I'm very excited to see where it turns into. I know even in just like supply chain, traditionally, just for like shipping goods, just in shipments, you lose billions and billions of dollars a year in loss and fraud because they don't have that immutable system. And a lot of people don't realize that it literally transfers like a couple hundred different chains of custody, just trying to send something from, say, Canada to China, and not realizing how many different like intermediaries and middle people are in the way there. And having, a blockchain where everybody's being able to transparently see that data move from one, distribution house or transportation company to another is actually very critical to make sure that you know when something was tampered with, or if something was tampered with, and where it's actually even sitting. Because I was really shocked. Just, you know, everyone saw that toilet paper kind of crisis we were going through, and it was that lack of assurance of where is it sitting in the supply chain? Will there be more of it? Like, do I have to buy all the mustard off the shelf today because there's no more mustard tomorrow because there's no more supply chain? People, you know, I think there'd be a lack of panic. A lot of people would calm down knowing that there is that kind of resiliency and immutability in our supply chains, at least hopefully.
No, and we talked a lot about security and safety, particularly when Maman brought up those ideas. But there's another piece also, which is pure just economic efficiency. So there's 60 million units of pharmaceuticals that are authenticated, but because they're being returned, because they're unused in other jurisdictions, they're pulled out of the supply chain. And it takes a very, very long time to get them back into the supply chain. And so in many cases, the date then expires and they're not being able to use. And so you've got wastage within the system. So there's the safety component for sure. And that's more important from our perspective. But then there's also economic efficiency. If you've got an authenticated drug sitting there and you don't need it and you want to put it back in the supply chain, it's very cumbersome today to do that. But again, this kind of a system, you would literally just scan and it'd be able to be right back in, right? And you have full traceability.
Absolutely.
I think that also speaks to some of the risks as well in terms of managing that efficiency or that continuity within the supply chain that insurers we often turn to as a way of minimizing those risks. I think some of the transferring of risk and how that's managed will also start to see changes as a result of blockchain's deployment in these supply chains, where you might be able to not just ensure a given product arrives as planned, but also better apportion where those risks sit for the purposes of remedying any defect or problem or disruption.
So from this, I think it's pretty clear that the healthcare space, pharmaceutical space, definitely kind of urgently needs this proof of provenance and a rather large technology upgrade. However, the kind of shifts in the ways industries operates are always really challenging. What do you see, how do you think these companies, whether they're in the digital healthcare space or, supply chain, how do you see them overcoming these obstacles to, getting this digital transformation?
I think there's going to be an easier way of handling this in the physical movement of material and medications as it moves through the supply chain, and dealing with some of the questions we posed around patient access to credential information. I think that's just going to be the nature of the debate. It'll be easier for us to fix the movement of the good. So I think that's going to be one particular area, focusing in on the low-hanging fruit that's going to be less controversial, to demonstrate this at scale. And I think that will help build momentum and credibility around the deployment of technology and blockchain specifically in our health system.
Yeah, I completely agree with Tom there. One of the things that comes to mind is establishing that common baseline, which is a key component. We know that pharma value chains are global, and there's borders to cross, logistics elements, language barriers. Another opportunity for technology to assist in that integration. One of the things we've been seeing is this heightened level of collaboration, and one that particularly comes to mind is Pharma.Aero that Edmonton Airport is a member of, because it includes all of the stakeholders in the chain. The pharma manufacturers are at the table, the airports are at the table, the administrators are at the table, and the goal is to create, in this non-competitive environment, to create a harmonious framework, which is key ultimately for both blockchain implementation, but also adoption. We're talking about highly valuable commodities, that literally save lives, and the really exciting part is that these ledger technologies introduce inherently standardization without the need to modify existing processes. In all cases, some aspects may need to be revised, but if there's a manual process or paper documentation and things like that, but with the ability to introduce IoT sensors and other technologies to existing infrastructure, there's opportunities to build onto existing processes and bring the visibility immediately in many cases.
Absolutely. There's another one I heard of, and I think it was called MediLedger. They're kind of like another consortium. And one thing about COVID and also blockchain, it kind of brings together this kind of like collaboratory way of operating, or bringing, competitors to becoming collaborators. This one I think has Pfizer, Dickinson, and Premier, and they're working on just that vaccine and medication provenance, optimized distribution networks, as well as theft prevention. So it's pretty cool. There's a couple of these consortiums that are coming out of the woodwork. Because realistically, I mean,
yeah, and so the critical thing there, Kalia, so this consortium, MediLedger, is there. They've got about 5 or 6, I think, big players that are tied in already, which is wonderful. The next step, though, is not only you need to get everybody onto these kinds of systems, right? And the biggest challenge, when we think about it from a Canadian perspective, is also how do you get the public sector tied in as well? Because you've got governments procuring as well, and so they need to be on these kind of systems as well. So you talk about the technological investment required. I think typically industry is on the forefront of those kinds of investments to be able to make them. But we also need to make sure that our public systems are there in place to be able to do that too. And for Canadians, and particularly as it pertains to pharmaceuticals, that's something of great importance to us.
And that I think would be an excellent way, Reg, as well, to look at the identity management piece, where we can so easily integrate that across a number of public services. And that may present the low-hanging fruit for entering into the personal health information conversation when it's also your driver's license and part of the passport.
Agreed. Yeah.
I'm definitely really interested in the vaccination passport, because I've heard a couple different ways. Like, I'm like, how would this look? Is it like actually like your passport and you scan it, and somehow the passport office has access to your medical credentials to be able to see this? Or is it like a separate little booklet that you get to be able to show this? And I don't know, did any of you guys have an idea about how this medical, like the vaccine passport, might roll out, and how they might?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, honestly, Kalei, I think it's just a barcode that you have on your phone. We've already deployed this in Canada with respect to COVID-19 testing. And so once you get your testing, if you had to enter in one of the airports, you could show your barcode, demonstrate that you've already been tested. So there is no reason why this passport to confirm vaccination just be a barcode on your phone.
How would they prevent that from being fraudulent, though?
I think this is where the opportunity for a technology like blockchain is really highlighted. I cannot see a scenario where a process like this that needs to be globally portable and verifiable and authentic exists without underlying blockchain technology enabling that. So this is just, the great one to highlight, Clea, because this absolutely means that this is going to perhaps be a global widespread adoption, proven use of this technology that ultimately will enable travel to restart.
I 100% agree with that. And the only thing, like just from where I sit, there's so many organizations coming out with so many different blockchains, and for the passport to work on a global scale and for everyone to kind of agree, it would mean everyone would have to agree to the exact same blockchain system to be able to have that work. And then all the medical credentials would have to go up into one universal blockchain system. And I just feel like we're a little bit maybe away from that level of global agreement. But it's definitely, like, I see that happening in Canada, maybe in the States, but there's some countries where it's like, no, we'll use our own. Like, that'd be interesting.
Well, I think this is where your comment and Reg's sort of collide and highlight the need for that collaboration, but also by making sure we have the right stakeholders. Reg pointed out, making sure that we have public sector and governments around the table. There's a lot of innovation that takes place in the private sector, but there's a need to ensure that that the industry collaborates with the public sector to make sure that there is that widespread adoption. And I maintain a high level of optimism. Again, I'm coming from an aviation industry is inherently global. Whether you're landing a plane in Edmonton, Canada, or Lagos, Nigeria, the framework and the communication and the flow of information is essentially the same. So we've been able to agree on a global standard. Hasn't been easy. It's been a lot of work to get to this point. But similar to what we've seen in ensuring that there is a global framework that allows for the free movement of people, goods, and investment in many cases, I'm optimistic that this will be another scenario where we'll recognize that we have to come to terms to restart the global economy in a way.
I think we already have a system we can borrow heavily from with just that notion of our travel visa systems. We're used to applying for those in other countries. This would be, I suspect, probably the easiest way for us to begin that active travel. And it's just a question of how do we render that? Do we see that as a piece of paper we receive in the mail, or a barcode, or something else?
Do you think organizations, like I know we have one like the World Health Organization, they were kind of like the first ones to come out with guidance, so to speak, on managing something like this. So maybe something like, you know, them saying this would be like, you know, a good system to be able to use might encourage, since it's already multiple countries coming together working under one umbrella like that. But yeah, no, just definitely be interesting. I'm hopeful that through blockchain, there won't be a lot of fraud in terms of that system. So my next question to you guys today, so there are so many industries that are definitely moving towards optimization as well as automation that's enabled by blockchain technology. And they're going to operate fairly differently in the coming decades. So do you guys have any predictions for how you see our healthcare industry over the next 10 years through digital adoption? Be a big one.
Reg is smiling. Reg is smiling. He's got something good.
Yes, I'm waiting for Reg.
Well, you know, I'll just build on what I was talking about before, Clea, which is this whole idea of really providing power to the individual, right? Because when you've got these mechanisms to verify, validate, trace information and data, now that empowers the individual. And you said it yourself, Clea, for the individual to carry their own data, to make the decisions around that. So I think that's one of the big changes we're going to see, particularly in Western medicine, is the way the patient interacts with the health system and others in terms of being able to be in far more control of the data that they have, and being able to act on it in a way that's far more proactive. And so what that's going to have some significant plays, not only in terms of how healthcare is delivered and managed, but I think it's actually going to drive different healthcare outcomes as well. Because now when you are managing your own health and you have the power to do so, you're going to be very proactive in doing that, and doing that likely far more effectively than being run by a system, right? And so if you're plugging into a system that enables you to do that, I think you're going to see some significant changes in terms of how healthcare is going to be delivered, and our relationship with clinicians and other providers of healthcare are going to shift. And I think it's going to shift in a good way, in the sense that quite often in Canada, you know, if you talk about a public health system and customer service, folks look at that and say, no, that doesn't go together. But I don't see why it doesn't. It doesn't matter who the provider is. Customer service is always key. And I think that customer service aspect is actually going to play a role now, once the tables have turned in terms of who actually has the information and how they're using that information. So that's mine.
Just to build on what you're saying there as well, Reg, in one of my past lives, I was involved in the medical device business, and one of the models we were learning about with Alberta Health Services was the notion of how do you change and transform the delivery of care service. Just to highlight Reg's vision with a bit of an example. When we discovered that you could actually put nurses in the call center to triage patients in the community around certain types of care issues that need to be managed on a chronic community care basis, there was a dramatic improvement in the speed at which those patients were receiving care, and in the outcomes they were also seeing in the benefits to their health. So as we use some of these technologies that allow us to do more of our own testing, like a stick or lab on a chip, or be able to do some form of something that might be more delivered in our home or with a health professional, rather than taking days or weeks to go through a lab testing procedure. That's going to make us more efficient as a system, but it's also going to give us a way to more proactively alert a family member if I've authorized them to automatically see a test result, where they might be able to say, oh, Dad, you need help on X because clearly your medications are not necessarily being taken the way they were prescribed. So now all of a sudden that augmented care team can truly, I think, also be empowered with some of these changes that Nick was alluding to as well.
It's been really exciting to hear, and it's interesting how much we've been building on the conversation we've been having over the last little while. You know, my opinion on this, Clay, is visibility is not a value add anymore. It starts to become the baseline, and as there's greater trust and integration, it just enables that to happen. We talked about health and wellness and self-care being elevated from that, as Reg put it, in the hands of the patient, which I completely agree with. And it's really exciting to think about, given what we're living through right now, what that means for all of us and how that changes, how, just as Tom said, what the future of the delivery of care is in a way. I have a strong feeling, just as mainstream mobile banking is today, mobile healthcare perhaps becomes a new reality. At the airport, we've had a front row seat at the growth that we've experienced on the e-commerce side, as an example, and I'm excited to think about what that means from a healthcare perspective, what that means for prescriptions. The future of how they're administered, how they're delivered. The TrustPix platform, just Tom's here and speaking about the ability to be able to validate perishables or your food. There's no reason why the same can't exist for your medication as well. So I have a strong hope and optimism that we're going to start to move towards there. But all of the decentralization, whether it's be healthcare or whether it's from records management or inventory management, at the end of the day, the underlying technology, really the only way this will be adopted is with something as immutable or trusted as blockchain technology.
Absolutely. I have I guess like a hope in terms of like healthcare and where it could go. And like, I see blockchain as like a tool. And I think when people talk about, technologies, they really do need a holistic solution. Like, blockchain is not your hero end all be all. You need other technologies to complement, to make it work. You're going to need IoT to capture data. Machine learning helps with tagging and scrubbing and doing other things with your data. And blockchain is great for being able to have immutable data records. But in the healthcare space, like, we've I don't know, many people across the world have lost loved ones to diseases that maybe they didn't have to lose them to. And what I love about the concept of like having that data ownership, being able to track your entire medical history, like, you never know if something's relevant, from your physiotherapist to your optometrist to your naturopath. And if doctors were able to see all of this information in one spot, your entire health history. And if there's like machine learning programs, they could take that and decipher and say, you know what, you look like you might be at risk for this. Let's start a mitigation strategy now to save you for tomorrow. And I know there's privacy concerns and all that kind of stuff, but if there's a way to anonymously put a lot of health records and data, so you couldn't identify the individual, but the more data you've collected, the more you're able to create data points to say, okay, based on this is the most likely outcome, and this is how we can help prevent that. I just feel like the longevity and the ability to not lose loved ones unnecessarily would be incredible. So that would be a big one. And then, now that our world is so interconnected, for the last, 50 years, we've been flying all over the place. We're connected to all four corners of the globe, but it was predictable that we'd end up having this global pandemic. The fact that we're not just traveling by boat, and most people died on the boat before they got to the land. If they had a disease on the boat, it's like, quarantine the boat, don't get off the boat. Right. But there was no way to call ahead. You just quarantine that, and you were usually able to keep it safer there. But now you have no idea. You're traveling all which way. So now that we've experienced this on a global scale, being able to have these technologies, and I don't know if we'll ever be able to predict the next one, but at least be able to mitigate it to the point where everyone's lives aren't so heavily disrupted and businesses aren't so heavily disrupted like we've seen what's happened in aviation and other spaces. It's going to be very difficult to recover from an economic viewpoint because we weren't prepared, So I hope technology will get to the point where we could be much more armed and prepared for something like this in the future.
Yeah, Clay, I completely agree with you. And, you talked about the ability to sort of save the individual and have that impact there. And absolutely, that's true. The other opportunity, which we're living right now, is just the whole public health side of things, right? And so if we can do that, make that data available, there are other techniques available today from the privacy side of things, like synthetic data, for example. You tie that in. Now you can actually, instead of saying, hey, we need to close down this entire jurisdiction and all businesses, we can actually say, actually, here's the cohort that we need to really focus on. And we can quarantine or do what we need to do there, vaccinate first, whatever it is. We can actually make data-driven decisions and be smarter about our resources. Like you see it every day on the news right now, right? Ontario just shut down schools and did this and this and this. It's your best attempt at trying to contain things. But if we had the information at hand, we can say, actually, this is where we need to go. This is exactly what we need to do. And so, Clay, that's exactly what you're talking about now. And so instead of the individual, you can also apply that on a public health perspective as well. And we can be far more refined in terms of how we react to these kinds of circumstances. And then to your point, perhaps even get to the point of prediction, right?
Oh, for sure. I've seen some crazy things. I don't know if they're true or not, because you read things online sometimes and you're like, is that real? I hope it is. But now there's like these technologies where the doctor doesn't even have to be in the same country as you and he can perform surgery, right? So you don't even have to wait for this specialist or fly to this other location. They can do all these incredible surgeries, and the machines and tools that they're using are just like precision. It's like, okay, that is huge. Or maybe one day, your doctor will just come through your VR and just, a holograph like Star Trek is going to pop up in front of you and he'll be able to take your temperature and everything. And you never
and then with blockchain, you've just credentialed that surgeon now. So it doesn't matter where that surgeon is. You've got the credentialing set and you're okay to go.
And the scan you're referencing is the one that you experienced as you went through the security checkpoint at your local airport.
Yeah. Okay. There's a company in Edmonton called Nito.ai, I believe. And they're like
Nito AI, yeah.
Yeah, so cool. They have a tricorder. I'm like, so I'm a Star Trek. I'm a nerd, I'll admit it. A freaking geek out on Star Trek, and their little medical tricorder device. I'm like, are you serious? Like that actually exists now? It's just like, I don't know exactly how it works, but just you see Star Trek and it's like you scan the body, you know exactly what's going on. Your little holograph comes in and he's like, this is how we diagnose you, puts a little something in you and you're good to go. And it's like, no one ever dies in Star Trek land. So maybe like a millennia we'll get there, but
well, what's really interesting is a lot of these automated or autonomous systems and some of the robotics that we speak about, it seems nascent technologies in particular spaces, but they're proven technology in many others. And what comes to mind is over 95% of flight today is essentially automated. Pilots love to fly, so they choose to aviate, but most of flight today is essentially automated. So the reality is that there's underlying systems that have been built over many years that are now migrating into other spaces, and the application is really exciting because it's proven in many cases. It's not new technology; it's just perhaps new technology in particular application. So that's where I'm definitely very optimistic about where we can go, and as we start to enhance the importance that we've always placed, but clearly to a much different. Maslow's hierarchy is completely being remixed right now when we think about our focus on self-care and wellness and things like that. So I'm really excited about what that means. And at the end of the day, it all needs to as Reg said, the credentialing and the authenticity of this will be key to make sure that when you do read that article, Kalea, you know that it's real information.
And one of the things I think that presents us as a society as an opportunity at a time like this, with this kind of a digital transformation, is also the opportunity for us to encourage all of our other community members to look at this as a moment of discovery. So if I can opt in, if I'm an American, if I can opt into a research study based on the data from my Apple Watch, and be able to learn about that data once it's aggregated and anonymized to give me other insights. There's a phone app I have here on my phone that reads my heart rate variability through the camera and gives me a sense of, when it combines it with my dietary information, my exercise information, gives me a little bit of a personalized level of advice about how much of a serious workout should I have today. And I enjoy it when it tells me to take it a little bit easier. Those types of tools become things that we can opt into. And so with blockchain infrastructure and the supply chain challenges we were opening our conversation with, we're also creating the infrastructure to allow us to participate as citizens in this kind of healthcare self-discovery. So we may have personalized medicine that Red was speaking of in his vision, but those can be refined tools and they can be further augmented when we combine the insights that each of us individually has in an aggregated way that lets us further improve our health.
Absolutely. That's definitely going to be a brave new world out there. And technology is ever changing every day. I think I was reading another thing where they were talking about like little nanobots and how, I don't know when this would ever be possible, but they could put these little nanobots into your bloodstream and into your body and do like little repairs for you. So it's like, it's like one day you're just gonna be a robot body. So they'll just be able to transplant you. It's just like, it'll be fine. You get like new liver, new heart, all these artificial things. But it was like, wow, little robots to go in and like unclog, you know, arteries and stuff. So you less risk of a heart attack. Feel a little bit like the Borg. All right, so we have a question here. Okay, I feel like Reg, you got that reference. So what does blockchain mean to a US student pharmacist? I'm beyond intrigued. Ooh, I love it when people get intrigued. All right, who wants to take this one?
Well, I'll tackle it from two vantage points. One of my prior software companies, we actually track the credentialing of the pharmacists in the country here. And so I think one of those is an ability to look at a way to have your credential passport as you see the ability to have it recognized in the blockchain and accessible to future employers. Your employment history becomes one of those areas for tracking in that same kind of an environment. I think the second is ways for you as a pharmacist in administering care to your patients. The ability to rely on blockchain to give you a better, clear understanding of the medications, their source, origin, and availability as you look at meeting circumstances such as those that we're facing today.
I'd love to pick up on that last point Tom made because I completely agree. You know, from a supply chain perspective, from a pharmacist's point of view, being able to confidently hand over something across the counter and knowing where it came from, how it was maintained, and being able to confidently provide that information without any doubt about the authenticity of the product is exciting. And I think additionally too, it changes the level of accountability on the various stakeholders in the process as well, in the event that there are in fact deviations or incursions that occur. So I'm excited about, from a supply chain perspective, what that means, and ultimately the power that it places in the hands of the pharmacists that are ultimately interacting with our patients in many cases.
Absolutely, and there's kind of like there's a couple points to it. So like authentication, just again having that proven traceable proof of provenance for authenticating the pharmaceutical supplies. So if you're selling a medication from the pharmacist perspective, you want to know what medication you're handing out. Data security, preventing data breaches of your patient's private information, and using cryptography to do that. And there's, you know, like SHA-256 is just like military grade level encryption. It would take one computer 576 like years just to be able to crack through that, like a singular computer, not like a really enhanced one. But then also just health credentials, your patient knowing that you have verified, you know, health credentials, you took your studies and you are, you know, you pass that class or you pass that diploma, certificate, not sure how they call it, but being able to have that as well. So the patient trusts you, you can trust what you're giving to the patient, and you know that the interaction is also highly secure. With respect to the pharmacist advocacy for provider status, do you feel as though blockchain can aid in reimbursement for services? Yes, definitely. So there's a few ways that blockchain can do things like that, like enabling smart contracts would be one of them. So I'm assuming in the States there's, I don't know if we have that in Canada, but in the States, there are like commissions that are paid out for certain things, and being able to verify that this patient took this medication, and using and tracking that on blockchain, that is possible. Right now, I know there's a case study that's being used, but more in the travel space. So travel agents that work with, Expedia, Travelocity, things like that. Expedia would end up getting kind of like a, what do you call it? Like a travel service fee, or a commission for someone booking a hotel through their site. And sometimes that can have like 90-day, 180-day delays based on if there's any disputes, if they're not able to verify that that person actually stayed, what if they modified their stay while they were there, things like that. So using blockchain, they've actually been able to speed up and get reimbursement for their commissions within weeks as opposed to months, because they can verify and validate everything from their history on blockchain. And it's about an $84 billion a year kind of thing in terms of people traveling and using all these different types of websites. So in that case, yes, definitely aid for reimbursement is very possible to make it quicker, more verifiable.
But I don't want to.
Particularly in Alberta, we've taken the lead in Canada in terms of the expanded scope of practice for pharmacists, right? And so on the reimbursement services side, there's consults that pharmacists can do, but triaging that is really difficult right now, right? And so the ability to have a sort of a transparent system where you can do that, it would be really beneficial both for the patient and for the pharmacist to be able to know that, okay, this pharmacist has that expanded scope, and I can now do a deeper consult with this pharmacist at my time of choosing, not when you're rushing to get your prescription filled and you got to go home and make dinner for the kids. So, those kinds of scenarios actually make it a lot easier to execute on that. And so the reimbursement side of things would really be far more efficient on that front.
I just wanted to, I completely agree. I just wanted to make a really quick point as we're talking about payment and reimbursements, and the realities as we eliminate or at least extract out of the system some of these inefficiencies and simplify processes and avoid wastage and other things. There's ultimately a cost component as well, where we're ultimately finding a way to eliminate cost across the system. And I think that's a key component that we should highlight as well. Absolutely.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you guys so much for being a part of our webinar today. I really love this one. This was exciting. If you guys listening are interested, we are doing a What is Blockchain class next Thursday. And then the following Thursday after that, I think we are going to be talking about regulatory and securities compliance in the fintech side of things. So if you want to keep up to date on all the events we do, we generally have a webinar or a class every Thursday of the month. Again, just go to canadablockchain.ca. It's in our magazine. It's also on our website and on our Eventbrite. So thank you guys so much. Really appreciate you guys joining us here today.
Appreciate being invited. Thank you very much.
Mostly clear.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.